Thank you, Kara, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Weinstein, the Associate Director at the Religious Action Center, and thrilled to be joining you all for this webinar. We're focusing, as you know, on sanctuary and the sanctuary movement. And as Reformed Jews, this is an issue that's very personal to us as immigrants, the children of immigrants, the grandchildren and the descendants of immigrants to this country and to others, of course, as well. Throughout history, as a Jewish people, we've known the experience of being strangers in strange lands, and too often we weren't welcomed by our neighbors, and we experienced the worst of what it means to be an immigrant. And so our reform movement's commitment to comprehensive immigration reform is really rooted in that shared historical experience, as well as the biblical mandate to welcome the stranger that's repeated 36 times in the Torah. And for us, comprehensive immigration reform means, of course, border security, a streamlined processing of visas, a commitment to obey the rule of law, family reunification, and a pathway to citizenship. But unfortunately, despite strong bipartisan support in Congress and really across Americans in every state, no such plan has been able to get out of Congress and to the president's desk. And so the challenge that we face is urgent, but it's certainly not new. In the 1980s, many Reformed congregations declared themselves places of sanctuary to undocumented Central Americans who were fleeing the violence and oppression in their own countries and came to the US and were at risk of deportation. And so today, many congregations are again asking what they can do to respond to the current situation. We again see undocumented immigrants at risk of deportation, many of whom have lived in the United States for most, if not the overwhelming balance of their lives, contributing to their communities and the country and to their families' well-being also. So what we're going to do today is hear about several of the opportunities for action that are collectively known as sanctuary. And to be clear, this isn't just about physically welcoming individuals into the congregation, but about supporting those at risk in a range of different ways and partnering with other houses of worship that are doing this work already. So we're going to hear from experts, from advocates and clergy who are engaged in this work, and they're going to share their knowledge with us. If you have questions, you'll notice that there is a Q&A box in your toolbar. So please use that box to ask anything that comes to your mind during the webinar, and we'll have a chance to pose questions at the end of the webinar to our presenters. So let's get going. I'm thrilled to introduce our first expert and advocate. It's Liza Lieberman, who is the Director of Advocacy and Outreach at HIAS. I'm sure everyone on this call knows HIAS as the oldest international migration and refugee resettlement agency in the United States, and really our leader in the Jewish community's commitment to immigrant and refugee rights. I've worked with Liza for many years. She is bar none among the most passionate, talented, knowledgeable experts who are doing this work today. Our Jewish community is certainly lucky to have her leading our advocacy, and those whose lives are directly impacted by these issues that we're discussing today are even luckier to have her on their side. So Liza, all yours.
Oh, Barb, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining the call. There could not be a more urgent issue of our time right now, as far as I'm concerned. You all are reading the headlines. This is front and center of our time right now and our headlines, frankly. So I've been asked to speak about what the term sanctuary means today. It's a little different as we're sitting today in Trump's America than it did in the 1980s. I just want to share that the term sanctuary historically has referred to the act of providing support and protection to refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants who fear persecution in their homelands and need a safe, temporary place to live. So historically and still today, places of worship, along with schools and hospitals, are considered legally sensitive locations. So law enforcement officials cannot search, interview, or arrest people there under most circumstances. So some of these raids that we've seen, those are not supposed to happen in these sensitive locations. So as Barb mentioned, and as you all know, in the 1980s, many synagogues and churches were involved in the national sanctuary movement. This was mostly to protect Central Americans who were seeking safety in the U.S. and risk deportation back to their war-torn countries. this is similarly, even similarly with Central Americans, what we're seeing again today. So in around 2007, we saw a lot of workplace and neighborhood raids. Those raids were really escalating, so a new sanctuary movement began. But then today, 10 years later in 2017, the term sanctuary tends to refer to several distinct yet related concepts. There's a little bit of controversy about the term sanctuary. We tend to use also the term a little bit interchangeably these days, a welcoming community, or I've heard compassionate community, which I really like. So sanctuary itself is kind of, I've tied it into 4 general concepts that I just want to go through, and then I'll kick it off to dig into some of those. But the first one is the same as it was in the 80s, of places of worship providing housing and lodging to refugees or asylum seekers or immigrants, and protecting them from deportation. So protecting them from being detained and deported. And this means actually providing them a place to live. So that's number 1. Number 2 would be a community supporting a local agency that serves refugees and asylum seekers through legal services and other services like English and citizenship classes, psychosocial support, various things, but supporting a local organization that is providing those services. The third one would be a congregation saying that they will welcome refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants regardless of their status. That's another thing that this has come to indicate. And then the fourth one, where this is where it gets a little wonky, is that the term sanctuary, especially in the policy arenas, has come to mean a jurisdiction, so a city or a county that refuses to help federal enforcement, the federal government, carry out immigration enforcement. So instead, they have focused their resources on local law enforcement responsibilities, like keeping their community safe. And so in some communities, this is called, instead of the term we hear a lot is sanctuary city. That term, frankly, in my opinion, has become quite toxic, because the other side will say, oh, these are people that are directly disobeying orders and not cooperating with the federal government. But instead, I think there's a movement now to kind of change that terminology into more of a separation ordinance or something like that, or a welcoming community or welcoming resolution, so that it's clear that those federal law enforcement, they're actually just trying to focus on their job and make sure that the communities they're entrusted to protect feel safe with them and feel safe going to them to report a crime or to testify. So that is the fourth one that will get a little wonky, but I think that's probably not the focus of today's call. And so we'll get into the other one. So with that, I will hand it off to my colleagues and look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you, Liza, so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Max Antman, and I'm a legislative assistant that works at the Religious Action Center on Immigration. Now that we have a little bit better of an idea of what sanctuary is and how that can be addressed in our congregations, I want to turn it over to some experts who can talk about how this actually works in practice. So the first is Rabbi Jonathan Roos, who is a senior rabbi at URJ Temple Sinai, one of the oldest and largest congregations in Washington, D.C., and who is also a member of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, or CCAR. So Rabbi Roos, take it away.
Thanks, Max. Thanks, everybody, for being on the call. I want to talk about 3 things in particular in the time that we have. One, I want to talk a little bit about how we as a congregation got to this point, how immigration became such a major concern for Temple Sinai. I want to share with you a little bit about what we've learned from our experiences visiting the border and to some of the detention facilities that I can tell you about that experience, and then tell you a little bit about why we're bringing sanctuary to our board for a vote in just 6 days. So on the 15th, we're going to vote on that, and some of the challenges and benefits of providing sanctuary that we're considering. Before I cover those 3 things, I just want to say from the outset, in case it doesn't come across, in case I don't convey it well in my presentation, I would urge you and your congregations, if you can, to get involved in this movement in some way. So you just heard that there are several ways that a congregation could get involved, and if for whatever reason you can't technically get yourselves involved with the sanctuary movement, to really make the kind of support and the kind of support for Central American and Mexican immigrants and asylum seekers a priority with your social action programs. So to tell you a little bit how we got here, this is the previous slide. So how we got here, this will probably come back to us. There's one that says how we got here before this. Let me run through these for you as we're going through it. We got here, as Barbara stated in the opening, the Jewish values about how we should treat strangers are at the heart of what we believe in. We study it on a regular basis. And whether it's the daily or weekly recollection of Yetziat Mitzrayim that we say in the Vahavta or in Kiddush on Shabbat, or the once-a-year recollection that we are obligated to see ourselves as though we personally went forth from Egypt. We open our doors at the start of the Seder and we say, let all who are hungry come and eat. Let all who are needy come share with what we have. This has presented itself always as an opportunity to really put those values and those rituals into action. It's true in our congregation, we've had a long history of social justice. Our founding rabbis were Balfour Brickner and then Rabbi Eugene Littman, both of whom have been a central part of the RAC and the Commission on Social Action. So it has certainly been an important part of the congregation. But throughout our history, including when the URJ issued its call and the resolution to join the sanctuary movement, Sinai has participated in it. So for us, I will say it has been part of our history and part of something that's been important to our people. I can share with you one story in particular about the summer of 2004 in which many, many of these values coalesced for us. So it actually started in the spring at Yom HaShoah. We had a member of our congregation named Leon Merrick. He shared his story about his survival and then about his resettlement in Washington, D.C. at the end of World War II. And in particular, he shared the very moving moments in his story about times when both completely random acts of kindness from strangers and the organized efforts of the Jewish community were instrumental in his successful resettlement and now a big, happy, growing family and deep appreciation not only for life but for the community here. Leon shared that in the spring at Yom HaShoah. That summer, 2014, was the summer you might remember when there was a significant increase in a wave of unaccompanied minors who came across the border into Texas. And during that period, I was leading a temple trip to Israel. And on every one of those trips, we go to Atlit. So if you're not familiar with Atlit, Atlit is now a museum, but it was a detention center that the British operated during the Mandate. And so Jews who were fleeing Europe and trying to make it to the land of Israel at the time were stopped and then interred in this detention camp. And if you ever get a chance to go there or look at the pictures online, it looks like a concentration camp. It was impossible not to visit Atlit and have Leon's words ring in certainly my ears, if not the group's ears, and to be very well aware of what was happening back at home as our country and our government was scrambling to find ways to both house and deal with that wave of unaccompanied minors and others, and that we started to see the construction and the quick adoption of various facilities as detention centers to handle that. It was in that context that we were then called by an organization called KIND, that's Kids in Need of Defense. They had a family in Washington, D.C., whose case they were working on to help with their status, but they needed some help with everyday needs. The girls they were representing, who at the time were 4 and 7, they needed medical care, they needed help with schools. Those are the kinds of things we could provide while the lawyers they worked with helped with their immigration status. So all of that really led us to say, we have got to get more involved and do something to help the Central American and Mexican immigrants and asylum seekers who are living right here in our community and who are coming across the southern border. So we did two things. We started a group to work on the programs here and connect with agencies in the Washington, D.C. area that provide support. And then we went down to McAllen, Texas. That came up because McAllen happens to be where the Rio Grande station of the Border Patrol is located. Many of the migrants were then being detained there. It was kind of where the funnel came to its point. And I was reminded that one of my classmates, Rabbi Claudio Kogan, is the rabbi of a Reformed congregation, Temple Emmanuel in McAllen, Texas. I got in touch with Claudio. one thing led to another, and very quickly we had a group of 10 people working with the congregants from Temple Emmanuel to volunteer at the respite center the Catholic Charities runs there. So that's where some of the pictures that I can share with you come up. So these are not my pictures because we weren't allowed to take pictures, but this is exactly what we saw in the station of the Border Patrol in McAllen. So we were allowed to go in, we were allowed to meet with the families. So in one cell, there are women with their children. In another cell, there's unaccompanied minor girls. Another cell has unaccompanied minor boys, and another cell has men. So we were able to go in, to meet, to talk with them, to pray with them. And it's an incredibly heart-wrenching scene that just really leaves you not only breathless, but really understanding the depth of the humanitarian crisis that's happening here. We then, from there, were able to go to one of the warehouses that's been converted into a detention center. So the picture on the top left, you can see Rabbi Jonah Pesner. On the far right with Rabbi Claudio Kogan, Sister Norma Pimentel, and me. And in the back is what you would otherwise just look at the outside, other than the Border Patrol cars, looks like a warehouse in an otherwise pretty large industrial park full of warehouses. But when you get inside, you see it's been converted into essentially a holding facility for migrants who are going to need more than a couple of days before they get placed into different facilities. So this is what we saw. We got to tour and meet the not only the migrants who are there, but the Border Patrol agents who are working with them. So from this, we learned a couple of things, policy issues aside. So there are some significant policy issues to be considered. And we heard, especially from some of our peer, the congregants of the synagogue in McAllen, not everyone was on the same page in terms of the policies. And there are significant technical differences between a refugee, an asylum seeker, an immigrant. And we recognized all of that. And yet being there really, again, demonstrated the important humanitarian need that has to be addressed and speaks to us, each of us, directly from our tradition and from our own history. We also learned, especially from there, that there was nothing like seeing it yourself, that we have got to be able to get down there and to see the border itself, the area where the wall is to be constructed, these facilities, and to meet the individuals and hear their stories. And last, we learned that we need what I'm calling both the starfish and the upstream stories, which is to say, providing some of that direct service to people, but also being able to address the root of the problem and the basic source from which these problems come. So all that leads, the picture that you're looking at right now is inside the respite center that Catholic Charities opened at the Sacred Heart Church in McAllen. So the inspiring story that we got here was that as the city was dealing with this crush of refugees, the mayor ultimately called the bishop called Sister Norma, who's in that picture. Sister Norma called the priest at the church and said, "Can I use your social hall for a little while?" The priest, without even thinking, agreed. Now here we are, almost 4 years later, and it continues to serve as the respite center, both inside and outside. What we learned from that was that the actions of institutions like ours can make a real difference. We looked at ourselves, the members of Temple Sinai, and we said, what would happen if they called us and asked us if they could use the social hall? We would have 100 reasons why we couldn't turn our social hall into a facility to be used for helping people like this. The inspiration led us to at least think, what can we do? What little can we do? And in the next slide, you can see outside the facility. So this is the church parking lot. It looks like a refugee camp. So to the extent that one thinks in America in 2014, 15, 16, 17, we don't have a refugee problem, you just need to look into the parking lot of the Sacred Heart Church in McAllen to see what exactly is going on down there and the need for all of us across the country to help absorb it. So what we're asking our congregation to do is to become part of the sanctuary movement. The way we've done it is the following, and the things I would suggest is we started with the groundswell. So I listened to the people who were talking about this already, who wanted to do something more. I put them together into a task force and introduced them to each other. They started to do the research. We got a couple of attorneys to get involved who had the expertise to look into some of the implications for the synagogue. We started to do research, including in particular the story of Arch Street United Methodist Church. We're going to hear from the Reverend shortly with their incredible story. We looked into the implications. We've put it all together. We've shared it with the members of our board to let them think about it. We've been very clear about what we are doing and what we're not doing, including the extent to which this is a political decision for us and the extent to which it's not a political decision. So we're not purely saying this is a religious only. We do recognize, and we have had the question from particularly some Republican members of our congregation as to why we would make a political stance. We do have to be clear about what we're doing, and then we need to talk about it all the time. Keep building support so that it's not just something that's happening among a small handful, but it is a reflection of the core mission and core values that we have as Reformed Jews. We're going to ask our board to join the sanctuary movement, and as we're going to hear, I'm sure that it has to be done very publicly, so to understand the public nature of what we have to do. We're going to want to create some response teams. We are going to be willing to host individuals. We're going to have certain parameters around that so that we don't just open the door to anyone without any opportunity for us to have some input, but we do want to make sure that we can provide all of the support necessary and to make sure that we're living the values. So with that, I'm already several minutes over my time. I apologize, guys, for that, but let me turn it back to the organizers.
All right, thank you, Rabbi. Our next expert we are going to hear from is Reverend Hynicka, who is the senior pastor at Arch Street United Methodist Church in Center City, Philadelphia. So, Reverend. You're muted, Reverend Hynicka.
Reverend Hynicka, if you look to the bottom left of your screen, there should be a great.
Thank you. Sorry for that. Thank you so much for this time to be part of the this webinar. My name is Robin Hynicka. I'm the pastor of the Arch Street United Methodist Church in Center City, Philadelphia. And on November 13th, 2016, we answered the request of a undocumented Mexican man, father, husband, neighbor. We answered his request to provide sanctuary with a resounding yes. And that Sunday, he came into our worship experience with his immediate family and with his extended family, including the members of the immigrant rights organization known as Juntos, into sanctuary. And he has been in our church proper ever since, going over 80 days at this point. We got to this point because our congregation has been involved in refugee resettlement, immigration rights organizing and advocacy, and other aspects of what it means to provide sanctuary for over 6 years. We are a member congregation of the New Sanctuary Movement Philadelphia, and when our congregation did its discernment process and deliberation around that, becoming a member of that movement and that organization, it was implied, if not implicit, that we would at one point be asked to put our assets, whether it's our own or our church's assets, on the line in support of those who are most vulnerable. Even then, we think of the crisis that we're in now involving immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. That crisis existed well before President Trump issued his executive order. What I've come to learn over the last 6 years is that immigrants, refugees, Black and brown folks in Philadelphia and throughout our land are always vulnerable. We had a little bit of a discussion at the beginning of this webinar about what sanctuary means. I hear more and more discussions with folks who have been advocating for justice in regard to the criminal justice system, public schools, and every other avenue of human rights around what makes life a quality life, that we need to provide sanctuary everywhere. For us in Philadelphia, it's now beginning to look like ending stop and frisk. It looks like making sure that every local school has a library, has a nurse, has a school counselor. So this idea of creating a safe community is getting extended, and using the term sanctuary is getting enhanced. But for us, our congregation at this point, we are fully committed to providing Javier and his family access to our building and to our resources and to who we are as human beings for as long as he desires to be here. He is high on the deportation list because of his numerous unlawful entries and several deportations prior to this last event. In this last event, he was detained for up to 15 months in a detention center about 3 hours away from the city of Philadelphia and his family. During that time, he got to know, and his family got to know, the organizers and the community members related to Juntos, the grassroots immigrant rights organization I spoke to you earlier in this in my comments about. They provided support and advocacy. They assisted Javier in getting connected to an attorney who was knowledgeable about his situation. It turns out that Javier was the victim of a major crime about 3 years ago, and he, in the course of cooperating with local law enforcement, those who perpetrated that crime were actually apprehended, tried, convicted, and they themselves were undocumented immigrants. They were deported. Because he cooperated with that investigation as anyone would have, he now is eligible for what is known as a U visa. The immigration process, as you know, is very convoluted and operates without any sense of real justice. He would have likely have been deported before he ever had a chance to get a date for a hearing. During his detention, this 15 to 16 month detention, it became obvious to Javier that his family, his stepdaughter, who is now 12, his son Javier Jr., who is 5, and his youngest son Halel, who is 2, were all experiencing severe trauma from the separation, as well as having witnessed ICE raiding their home and taking their father away. The daughter attempted suicide, and both young sons are exhibiting other aspects of trauma. He requested immigration to grant a 90-day period of parole so that he could go home and assist Alma, his wife, in caring for his children and bringing some resources to his family. And they granted that parole. And 2 weeks before he was to return, Javier, with the support of his family, decided to seek sanctuary. And so it was at that point that Juntos, the local grassroots organization who was supporting him and helping him make decisions, began seeking a place, a sensitive location like a church, a synagogue, or a mosque that would take Javier in. And they made several attempts, and several places could do a day or two or a week, but couldn't commit to anything long term. And so the executive director of Juntos called me and asked if Arch Street would be available to provide sanctuary. And I said that I believe we would. Let me communicate with my leadership, about 40 people within the congregation. And within less than a day, we had decided, and we had already begun making the space ready to receive Javier. 2 weeks sounds like a quick turnaround to get a decision, but as I said, for 6 years or more, we've been assisting with resettling refugees. We've been, I myself had an experience of supporting an asylee from the Congo about 10 years ago, bringing their entire family into the community in which I worked at the time. We have members who are working with a local immigration rights organization in addition to the new sanctuary movement. And as I said, we had already decided that we would put our assets on the line. As I've been talking to other groups about this and other congregations, people of faith and conscience, I've basically asked them to think about 4, and now I've added a 5th, questions as they contemplate where they're, how and why, and what they may decide to do in this time of stepping up and showing up. I ask each community or congregation organization to ask these 5 questions. 1, what is your community profile? Meaning, what does the community around you think of you? Do they see you as a trusted member of the community? Do they know you? Do they know what motivates you? And can you identify what steps you might need to take to improve that relationship, to enhance that relationship with the community around you, and especially in this instance with the immigrant community that you would serve, and the partners in the community you would need to have relationships with in order to make a good connection and an authentic set of relationships. The second question is, and these aren't in order of priority, they're all equally important, is what is your moral center? What's your sacred story that brings you to this moment? For us, there's the sacred texts, as some were mentioned earlier. For me, it really boils down to, in my tradition, holding true to my covenant that was said on my behalf when I was baptized as a child, as a part of that baptismal ritual and sacrament. A question is asked that goes like this: will you accept the freedom and power God gives you to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves? That means to me, while this is a political act, it is also an act of honoring the commitment at my baptism to be a citizen of the world that addresses, confronts injustice and oppression. And I believe with all my heart, soul, and mind that the current state of immigration law and immigration policy and immigration sentimentality within our nation and even around the world is unjust, and we need to do something about it by way of our faith. The third question is, what's your capacity? Do you have a bathroom in your building if you were going to bring someone in for a long period of time? Do you have access to the kitchen? Do you have a room that you can create privacy for the family to have? What's the capacity of your staff or your volunteers to make sure that hospitality is sustained over time? The fourth question is what is your ability to really work well with others? Can you allow and would you allow the immigrant organization, the immediate community that's closest to the person that you're supporting, to guide and direct your actions? That means losing some control over what we have and what we think we want to do, and relinquishing that control to those who are most vulnerable and who ought to be making decisions that are best for them. And the last question is a question I think is really important to ask: what is your appetite for risk? This is not providing support in this season of an assault on immigrants, refugees, and asylees, religious groups of folks from a variety of religious convictions, does not come without risk. There is no clear understanding or ruling that providing sanctuary, as we are for Javier, is not subject to some kind of legal challenge. But we're in the position of having a congregation and having a history of taking risk in other areas based on our convictions to be about justice and about being what we call folks who love our neighbors. We are blessed in many ways by having Javier here. I now have another grandson who follows me around like my own grandson does. Javier Jr. is such a delight. He is so happy that he can see his father anytime he wants, and to see the joy that comes from a father and a son sharing time together. They have been ripped apart is an amazing reward. With that, I'm going to stop, and hopefully all of you will find a way to connect based on your own conviction.
Thank you, Reverend. That was amazing. We oftentimes at the RAC get questions about the legality of all of this. So now that we've heard some stories about how this actually looks in different communities, we have Ryan Lilienthal, who is the founder of Ryan Stark Lilienthal Law Offices, a firm concentrated in immigration and nationality law, to give us a little bit more of a sense of what is the law behind this, and are we at risk in different areas, or are we not at risk? So Ryan?
Great. Yeah, I'll try to be fast because I know our time is now substantially limited and we want to leave time for questions and answers. Just broadly, I think that what we're looking at in terms of sanctuary fits into a larger theme on the part of the agenda of our new administration that's looking to tear at the fabric that binds communities together. And that's, it's a broad theme. And what that means is that the action that communities can take fall along a broad spectrum. This particular seminar is focused on sanctuary, but sanctuary itself is a fluid term. Even the Trump executive order doesn't provide a definition for sanctuary jurisdictions. And what it means is that we all need to think creatively, but be sensitized to the issues, the legal issues, and how far we as individuals and our congregations are prepared to go to provide assistance to the most vulnerable. And I guess that's kind of the framework of the few points that I want to bring is the issue of helping vulnerable and the scale of action that individuals can take and the legality related to that. Understand that this is a very broad brush. I've got a few minutes. I guess my goal is simply to put some issues on your radar. I think in terms of understanding legality, it's important to recognize that when it comes to immigration enforcement, there are generally two aspects of it. There's exterior border enforcement, and then there's interior enforcement. At the border, we have the Department of Homeland Security and the Customs and Border Protection Agency, and we've been seeing a lot of activity there, separate from the discussions about a wall, but a lot of activity there on the wall under the Obama administration, particularly with unaccompanied minors, and maybe a number of communities have been involved in helping those individuals. Then there's interior enforcement, and this is going to become very relevant, and the subtext to the Attorney General, or one subtext to the Attorney General Sessions, who was confirmed last night, hearings, is his responsibility for overseeing. He's the chief law enforcement officer now in the United States. And what does this mean for interior enforcement? And so we have two agencies that are responsible for interior enforcement: the Attorney General's office, the Justice Department under Jeff Sessions, and the Department of Homeland Security under John Kelly. So in terms of interior enforcement, so let me zoom in there because of the sanctuary issue, and sanctuary being less applicable to the border issues, although I think that's part of what we're talking about here. Who's vulnerable? There are different groups of individuals that fall along the spectrum. There are individuals who have entered without inspection. They entered the border illegally and come into the United States illegally, and they're now illegally here. Then we have individuals who come in some type of status, and they overstay their status, and they're essentially in an equivalent situation mostly to individuals who enter the country unlawfully. Then we have individuals who have been in the United States lawfully, who have violated some type of law. Mostly we see this in the context of criminal law. And so they may be a permanent resident, but they've done something wrong that also subjects them to immigration enforcement. And these individuals, when they get caught up in the immigration system, most often are permitted to go through a process. Through a removal process that begins as an administrative process with the immigration judge and immigration court, and then to the Board of Immigration Appeals. Those both fall within the authority of the Attorney General. And we saw Attorney General Ashcroft under the Bush administration do significant things to limit people's rights in the way those bodies were structured, and then appealing possibly to federal court, which is the judiciary, not within the executive branch. But then there are individuals that run the entire system. They've been caught up, they had a process, they've maybe gone to the immigration judge, to the Board of Immigration Appeals, maybe even federal court, and they've been ordered removed. And these individuals are at significant risk under the Obama administration. If they had a criminal background, that's what put them in a high priority focus of enforcement. But now under President Trump's executive orders, he's made very clear that he's put on par with individuals who have criminal violations, individuals who have crossed the border without inspection. And so now we have a much bigger class of individuals who are in that high priority category for enforcement. And we've already seen, especially within the last couple of days, ramped up activity when it comes to enforcement. We've seen it here in New Jersey. There's the article on the front page of the New York Times. And we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. These types of raids in the past have generally happened at people's homes, at people's place of work. And as we're, thinking about providing sanctuary and engaging congregations, like Reverend Heinicka's and others are going to be considering providing sanctuary within the congregation. So let me zero in on that in just a couple of minutes. But let me make very clear, and this is really important, is that when we use the term sanctuary, it might leave the false impression that somehow creates a safe zone. It doesn't. If you have the immigration and customs enforcement officers, coming to a home, coming to a place of employment, coming to a synagogue or a church that has the appropriate order signed by a judge, they have the authority to enter the building to arrest the individual for the enforcement activity. But there's much that individuals can do, religious institutions can do to help educate individuals so that they know their rights, we know our rights, so that we maximize the amount of protection that people have under the law. And keep in mind, as a lawyer, I see it as part of my responsibility to make sure that these immigration enforcers who are claiming to be going after people that have violated the law, that they themselves don't violate the law. And of course, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. We want to make sure, particularly the Fourth Amendment, that the amendment that has to do with unlawful searches and seizures is followed by by our immigration enforcers. And this is one way we can get involved in terms of educating individuals who are at risk, educating individuals in the community, and educating congregations. And so something as simple as knowing what an order that's actually enforceable to enter a home, a place of employment, a synagogue, looks like, as opposed to an administrative order, which is not enforceable to gain access to those types of buildings. So I've thrown a lot of that out there. It's really meant to be put on your radar. The big disclaimer as an attorney is, this is not a substitute for seeking legal counsel. And I'm encouraging you, as you engage in this issue, to bring in as part of your team attorneys that are part of your congregation, attorneys that are in the community, and then other service providers that are in the community so that you can act in a coordinated way. And then finally, I was requested to touch on the issue of harboring, because that goes right at the issue that congregations that want to do the maximum they can do, can they house an individual or family in the congregation? Is that something doable, and what are the risks? I did shoot an email off to the ACLU yesterday, with the question, what's the ability of a place of worship to block immigration from coming in? And the response I got was that it's essentially the same as a house. You need that order. The immigration enforcers need the right order to get access to the building. Of course, that leaves open a host of questions. What happens, come Friday night when you want to open the doors for services? What does that mean? But harboring is defined under the federal statute as applicable as an offense for any person who, knowing or in reckless disregard of the fact that an alien has come to, entered, or remains in the United States in violation of law, conceals, harbors, or shields from detection, or attempts to conceal, harbor, or shield from detection such alien in any place, including any building or any means of transportation. And different jurisdictions interpret this section of the statute differently. But for the most part, a four-part test is applied in almost all jurisdictions, but not all. Has this individual entered and remained in violation of law? Is the defendant concealing or harboring or sheltering the individual? Did they know or act in reckless disregard of the violation of the foreign national? And did they substantially facilitate the individual remaining illegally in the United States? And there are criminal penalties for those found to have violated this law, including up to 5 years imprisonment for a single person. So the stakes are real, and there are also civil penalties. And so as you're processing what you want to do, it may be that you want to, given our history as Jews, and I think of, the righteous among the Gentiles, we're really motivated to do, or many of us are motivated to do the maximum we can do, but we should do so in a knowing way. So let me just stop there and let individuals ask questions, and we can dive a little bit more deeply when those questions come up.
Great. So the first question, can Ryan Lilienthal reference articles that would be helpful for us to read? Ryan, can you answer that?
I don't know if Rich Morales is on. I'm certainly happy to forward articles. There are lots and lots of resources out there. And as an attorney, and I'm a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and we have a huge clearinghouse of available resources. And I'm happy to forward, particularly pertinent ones to you. And Rich actually had shared some with me related to the harboring that I thought were very useful. So yes, I'll do that offline.
Wonderful. Richard, do you have anything to add to that? For those who don't know, Richard is the policy director at PICO National Network and works very closely on ending the criminalization of communities of color, specifically undocumented immigrants.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that, just to back up a little bit, that, there are, one of the major questions that we get for congregations that want to do, host a family or individual is the issue of harboring. And so what we tend to do, and as you just heard, right, we give a 10,000-foot description of what harboring looks like and how that could affect you if you take in an individual or family. But I think it's, so once we do that though, if you still have concerns, then you definitely should talk to a local attorney or reach out to us offline, and we can guide you through that. The one thing that I want to be clear is that, harboring is something that applies to everyone, right? But it's not clear how it would apply to people or congregations that are doing this work. We're in a new era, and anything is possible. But in the past, harboring and that statute hasn't been used to prosecute congregations that have been working on sanctuary. But the past doesn't indicate, about how the future is going to apply in the future. So you definitely should be aware of what that looks like and how it applies, and talk to an attorney if you're very concerned. One thing that Robin said in a training 2 weeks ago that I attended, he said you need to determine your level of risk. And that's one that you should be very aware of. The other thing about the way that we talk about it in PICO National Network is that one protection that we have in terms of harboring is being very public. And Robin also did, and the group in Philadelphia, they did a great work of making sure that they held a press conference when they were bringing in the person that they were protecting, bringing public eye, acting as a public witness, and lifting up the story of the individual that they were protecting. So that's an important piece as well, that we believe that will offer some protection if you decide to host a family. That's just a little bit on the legalities.
Wonderful. There's a question that came in about the legality of cooperating with ICE authorities and whether or not that would jeopardize nonprofit religious status. Ryan or Rich, do you have a little bit more information on that?
So just for clarification, is the question non-cooperation with ICE?
Yeah, non-cooperation with ICE authorities.
Okay. So I do a lot of work with on the sanctuary city issue. And arguably the municipalities have a higher burden of expectation to cooperate with immigration enforcement. And some of what you're hearing around the country in terms of sanctuary cities, and again, make clear that no one should have the false impression that any entity can shield someone from legal action. So that expectation should be in place. But municipalities, it's generally kind of a centerpiece of a welcoming community, or a sanctuary community, compassionate community, in terms of dealing with law enforcement, is not complying with requests for detainers, for example, not providing information about individuals who come into contact with law enforcement. I would expect that for congregations, whatever burden the municipality might have, it's going to be less. If someone's, if you have an enforcement officer saying, is somebody in this building, I don't think that there's an expectation that the person has to go, find out if the person's there. So in some sense, it helped out a little bit more flesh to the question.
Definitely. And for people who are interested, who are, in different places around the country, how can they locate lawyers in their specific state or local areas to help them determine what risks are specific to their location?
Okay, so two kind of sources that immediately jump out are the local bar associations, like the county bars, and then anyone can go on to the website for the American Immigration Lawyers Association, AILA.org, and go through a find a member search, and you can search by state, or by more tightly defined search parameter. I mean, that would be a good place to start.
Great. And on the topic of harboring, who theoretically is liable for harboring? Would it be the clergy member? Would it be the synagogue board, the synagogue staff, members of the synagogue, if congregations are interested in participating in that form of sanctuary?
Maybe Robin or Rich have looked more closely into this, but I'd say that that's a very good question, and there's both fluidity to it, and then it could be up to the particular officers that are involved in the enforcement action if they wanted to pursue it. I mean, again, this is a new world. Under the Obama administration, and he deported a lot of people, more than anybody else, any other president. He recognized that there are sensitive locations that you just don't go to, and that's off. That's off the table. So in keeping with that, who knows how aggressive they'll be? We just don't know. So I think you're right to be thinking about that all those individuals you listed, when in terms of doing a cost-benefit analysis, I think that would be part of it.
Definitely. Any of our other panelists have anything to add to this? I would emphasize that for anybody who's on the call, if you have questions, we do have a few more minutes. So feel free to write in the Q&A box at the bottom, and our panelists will be happy to share their thoughts. Any of the other panelists with some final remarks?
This is Robin Hynicka again from Arch Street United Methodist Church. 2 points. There are a lot of unknowns, and I think that remains to be part of the challenge of being the human beings we want to be, and the sacred neighbors we want to be in this whole process. But 2 things about our unique context. One, Javier is wearing a monitoring device. ICE knows where he is, so he's not hiding, and that we've made that clear from the very beginning. The other thing is that in our situation, if there were to be some, we can't decide who law enforcement or the justice system would choose to identify as being out of compliance with the law as far as harboring is concerned. But I know in my own personal life, I'm in a position in my life that if I needed to take that responsibility on behalf of the church, I have made that known to the congregation. I am a widower. I am single. I'm in relatively good health. I'm a white male. My white privilege affords me the opportunity to do that. And while I cannot dictate to law enforcement that I be the one that they would focus on, but we can make that as obvious as we can. So that's our context. How other folks choose to deal with that, and whether there's other folks within my congregation who are willing to stand, I know there are, but not everyone is in the position to do that because of their life circumstances.
Hi, it's Rabbi Jonathan Roos here too, and I just want to add to that when we talk in our process about both honesty and clarity, this is something that's at the top of that list. That we're clear with everyone who's involved in making this decision, and we will be clear with the congregation and everyone that we recognize this is breaking the law. And to what Ryan said, I think what all the panelists have said, given the current administration and the fluidity and the constant change that we're experiencing, we really don't know what that might mean for us. So we don't want to hide. We don't want to pretend that no matter how righteous we think our actions are, and we do think that they are, it's not going to mean that we aren't breaking the law. And we're prepared to deal with that. And I think, like what the Reverend said, being clear about who among us are prepared to handle how much risk.
The other thing I want to say is we have, me personally and several other members of the congregation, we have a history of civil disobedience. We have a long list of civil rights attorneys in and around the area who would be willing to step up and serve us if in need of legal attention. And we've made this very, very public. We're also part of a large movements for social justice within the city, ranging from the Black Lives Matters community to the immigrant rights organizations to fair and full funding for public schools. We're part of a network of 60 congregations, Muslims, Jews, Christians, ethical humanists, all of whom who know what we're doing, so that there is a wide network of people who are supporting and would show up if necessary.
Wonderful. Richard, we have about 30 seconds left. I'm hoping there's one question that came in about a national coordinated group to unite all state and local groups working on sanctuary. I'm hoping you can close us out with a little bit of information about national work on this.
Yeah, so there's one big umbrella group that's called, you can find it at sanctuary2014.org. They are coordinating around the country the congregations that are offering sanctuary, and that's a place where you can sign up, and all organizations are putting their names on the list. As of 2 weeks ago, there are over 800 congregations that are involved somehow in sanctuary. I just wanted to quickly say before you jump off that, for us at PICO, that sanctuary, if you're willing to take in and host a family, if you're willing to support a congregation that's hosting a family, or maybe you can't do those things, but you're willing to conduct Know Your Rights, you're willing to set up a rapid response team, or do other things to protect the most vulnerable in our community, then you should declare yourself part of the sanctuary movement. We want as many people in solidarity to be part of this. So, and we'll be happy to reach out, talk to anyone that wants to be part of this.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone for being on this call. Thank you again to our panelists. This webinar will be recorded and will be on the RAC website. We also encourage you to go to rac.org/immigration, where we have a lot of the resources that have been discussed, and we'll be updating that with the information that was discussed here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.